Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader. Our guest today is Martin Fitzgibbon. His book is Behind the Curtain, My Life and Rocky Horror, which is a great title because, as Martin says, who would read a book about Martin Fitzgibbon? It's like, who would read a book, The Life of Me, Sam Hankin? Unless I could, I'm a bookseller, I could stick Albert Einstein, but Martin really was there. He was the drummer for, a couple of years at the very beginning of Rocky Horror. And, but the thing about it is, it also is his life. And you might think, well, okay. But then when you read the book, his life is just as interesting and I guess as well portrayed as he does the actual show itself. So I was really happy. And but the thing is, he's right. I've said it 1,000 times. You can't judge a book by its cover, but every single person who comes into my bookstore does exactly that. So welcome, Martin. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So since I'm talking about it, before we get into it, tell in your own words, since I kind of trash posted, how the title came about and why you thought it was a good hook.
Well, I mean, you just covered it in many respects, but yeah, as you said, if I'd have put My Life by Martin Fitzgibbon, then we wouldn't be doing this interview for a start, and nobody would have been interested at all. So it was a good hook on which to hang my hat, and I pondered it. I mean, it only took me about 48 years before I got around to writing it, so it wasn't something that you could say that I rushed into easily.
Well, if you look at the psychological aspect of it, I guess at the very end, when you talk about, I guess when you do your acknowledgments and the end piece, you say, I don't know why I did this, and you said it's like, like me too. It's like a lot of your life, kind of just happens. You don't know why you did it. Thought you make some money, but then you didn't make money.
So well, there's no. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go on. No, I was going to say. No, I never thought I was going to make any money. I don't know. For the last 30 years in music, I realized I wasn't going to make any money. So there had to be another reason for doing the book and making music, really. Yeah, I did get some encouragement, to be honest. I had friends of mine who'd said for years, look, you need to put this stuff down in a book. They were sufficiently interested. And I always said, I don't think really there's that much interest out there. But then I got contacted by a Rocky Horror sort of kind of fanzine website from a guy in Australia. And they wrote me and said, can you answer some questions? I'd obviously done a bit of research and found out that I had been involved in some way. And I wrote back some answers, and surprisingly to me, I mean, it caused an amazing response, really. And I suddenly had all these people who were sufficiently interested to make me think, well, maybe there is something there after all. Maybe I should kind of put this stuff down. So I was persuaded, and a little bit to my surprise, because I'm not a writer. I don't think I've written anything really very much since I left school, which is a long time ago. But I enjoyed it. I surprised myself. It was a challenge, for sure, in my case, but an interesting one. And I found it kind of, it piqued my creative interest in that way. So it was fun. It was fun. I didn't take enough time to do it. That's for a different reason. And I edited very heavily, which reminded me pretty much of the recording process in many ways. The albums and things that I've made. What I tend to do is throw a lot of stuff at the page, as it were. In this case, if we're talking musically, at the take, and then edited out later, safe in the knowledge that you are going to pare it back. So it was very similar in this writing the book, in so much as I did just that. I put a lot of stuff down. I cut a hell of a lot of stuff out. Kind of looked at it and thought, I don't know, this isn't going to be of any interest to anybody, you know. So I took that out. It probably would have been double the length had I stuck with it. But you know, who knows? Maybe people wouldn't have read it through to the end. If they do now, I don't know.
I did. Yeah, and we'll get to the Rocky Horror, which is what people want to hear, because you set it up that way. But you go back to a couple incidents with regard to the writing process. If you go back to that writing process, when you make that joke and you say your father was a heavy drinker, and you start talking about tea, and when he was in the TV and all that, you know, you dredge that up, but it's one of those memories that stays with you forever. And then what I thought was really good, you convey it pretty well, and with humor, which I also think as a bookseller really moves the reader along. If it's funny, they'll keep reading. So when you talk about that, and then another incident that I alluded to before we started was, you know, you talk about your work at the factory. You can remember this stuff, which is another good sign of a good book. You talk about, you know, you got your dermatitis from the oil, and the twins who would switch job when they got sick of the other one. How did you dread it, and how did you write it? I thought it was really, really well written.
Oh, thank you. I'll take that. That's great. Thank you, Sam. I don't know, really. That's not a very good answer for you, is it? You do kind of dredge up these memories, I think, as you go along. So once I started writing about the factory, then suddenly, you know, those kind of reminiscences came back to me. With my dad, well, you know, your parents are ingrained in your brain, aren't you? And I was incredibly lucky with my mum and dad, who were both fantastic. And drinking tea was, you'll be pleased to hear, and in your American viewers and listeners would be pleased to know, of course, it's an English kind of thing that we do, British thing that we do. It was a constant thing in our house. My dad, and particularly, drank tea seemingly throughout the day. The teapot was always on the go. And so I kind of tied that into him, and he very rarely drank alcohol, which was fine. I haven't entirely followed his lead. I like a drink within moderation. I still drink tea as well. So that kind of came along, and the factory thing followed on from that. There were some fun times there, some difficult moments as well. But you said about trying to keep it humorous and lighthearted. That was definitely an aim of mine from the beginning, because you know, who wants to read about other people's misery? I'm sure you can, if you want to go and read Therese Racan or something, if you want to be miserable. But I wanted to kind of play down those aspects of my life where things didn't go quite so well. They had to be mentioned to put everything into context and to explain my story. But I didn't want to dwell on them too much. And you know, overall, hell, I've got nothing to complain about. I've had a fantastic life, and
we're both here. We're both above ground.
Yeah, exactly. That's a bonus, right?
Yeah. And it's, you know, while you're talking, it's funny. I don't mean to like keep telling you how great you are. It was a good book. But what the thing about it is, when you're telling me about two things, I better write them down because I'll forget them. When you were talking about your dad didn't drink alcohol that much, then I immediately, for some reason, the scene came up where you're talking about the bar in the morning where they don't have tea, they didn't have wine. So I remember this, and they only had beer, because that's what you do at a bar. And it's early in the morning.
Yeah.
At the end of the bar, he's staggering. He gets up, comes.
Yeah.
He hasn't had his fill yet. How do I remember all that unless it's written well? Seriously.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. I mean, that incident, we maybe won't go into it, but it was just amusing. We were in the only bar in the Netherlands that didn't serve food, because everywhere else in the Netherlands at 3 o'clock in the morning you can go and get something to eat. But at 9 o'clock in the morning, when we were turfed out of our, I won't say room, we'd stayed at the promoter's house, and we slept on his floor in his living room. We were like little sardines kind of lined up on the floor. But he had to go to work because he had a proper job. And he said, look, guys, I'm really sorry, you're going to have to leave. And so we went searching for breakfast somewhere, and we were in the only bar, as I said, in Netherlands that didn't seemingly serve food. But the guys that were in there looked like they'd been in there for a good few hours, because they were, they were quite well gone. In one particular case, the guy you're talking about, he was way gone. Way gone.
Like when you go to the airport and you got an early morning flight, there's still all these guys sitting there drinking, like it's a vacation at the airport. You can drink anything.
Yeah.
Understood that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because I could just on and on. So I guess the best way to start is at the beginning and the phone call you got, and I guess go from there, at least the evolution of you getting there for the rehearsal, because the first get together, because what was very interesting was, and I don't know why this happened, how did everyone, as you tell the story, how did everyone really feel like this is going to be big, this is going to be a hit? Why did that happen? But first, talk about how you got involved.
Okay. Well, I got involved because I got a telephone call from a guy called Richard Hartley. And Richard was the musical director of Rocky, and subsequently he went on to do the picture show as well. And I'd known Richard and worked with Richard for 4 or 5 years, maybe. We'd done a fair bit of recording together, and we'd done a little bit of live work. We'd done a couple of concerts here and there, but principally we had recorded together. And he rang me, and how weird is this? Because this is 1973, okay? I couldn't remember a telephone call from last week, but I can remember vividly this telephone call from Richard. And he said, look, I've got this musical coming up at the Royal Court Theatre in Sloane Square in Chelsea, which immediately sparked my interest. A, because I hadn't done a musical before, and secondly, it sounded pretty fancy. The Royal Court Theatre sounded like a nice kind of a gig to do. And then he tempered my enthusiasm a little bit, not entirely, by saying, it's not in the main auditorium, it's in this small room upstairs, and I need a drummer who can play quietly, and you're the only guy I know who has the ability to do that. And I know, that's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it, in many respects, a drummer who can play quietly, but it was kind of something which had got me a lot of work. I was working a lot of jazz stuff at the time as well, and playing in small little clubs, little trios and things where you had to be quiet. So my immediate reaction was, this is great. And I said to him, this musical, it's not about God, is it? And the only reason I said that was because Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat had been playing in London. That had been followed by Godspell. Then we had, that had been followed by Jesus Christ Superstar. And on the back of that, we had Godspell. So I thought, maybe that particular subject matter is very well covered. And it just seemed that at that time, everything seemed to be about that particular subject. So in the case of Rocky Horror, I probably couldn't have been very much further away from the truth, really. And he explained to me roughly what it was about. There are certain aspects of that I think today a lot of people wouldn't have a clue who certain characters were. There was a guy called Charles Atlas, and Charles Atlas was a muscle man, a kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger of his day. And he used to have adverts in lots of the newspapers, and his strap line was, in just 7 days, I can make you a man. Okay.
Bonzo Dog Band and Mr. Apollo.
There you go.
And you picked the drummer from the Bonzo Dog, not the drummer. Yeah.
Bass player.
Bass player. electric
Yeah,
bass.
So, and he said that, and he told me about. He said, "You'll love this. This is great." And one of the things that he said was he explained this Edgar Lustgarten character. And again, I don't think too many UK people will have a clue who Edgar Lustgarten was, but he was a crime writer and a broadcaster. And I remember him from black and white movies on TV, B movies, where he would appear between scenes as the narrator. And this is who Richard based his narrator on. And he'd kind of come up with these wonderful cliches like, it was clear this was going to be no picnic. You know, he had this really big jowly face. And I used to love him. I thought it was hilarious. But Richard said to me, it's going to be huge. Those are the actual words that I remember him using. You know, don't worry, you're only going to get paid £20 a week. But it's going to be huge, and it's going to transfer for sure, which he was right in both regards. But to your question, how did we know? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's very rare. Hopefully you've been involved in something where you have a 99% degree of certainty that it's going to work. But
every once in a while, something in every once in a while, something in your head. Like if I'm building something or doing the book, you have something in your head, and once in like 100 times, it comes out exactly the way you wanted it to come out. Doesn't happen that often.
Well, it certainly doesn't happen that often to me. I'm certainly not building anything either. But yeah, so I went along to the first band rehearsal, and we rehearsed for 2 days, 2 consecutive days, and we were in a tiny little basement rehearsal room in London. It was the cellar of an old Victorian house, and we were given sheets of music. I guess you know how this works, but each band member, and I'll tell you who the band members were in a minute, but we were given a sheet of music. And at the top, because there are no lyrics attached to that, because there are no need for lyrics, there is no melody line attached to that, because again, there's no need for us to know that. We just need to know what our parts are going to be. So we didn't have a clue about lyrics, and we didn't have a clue about any melodies, but we did have titles at the top. So you had Sweet Transvestite. You're given a piece of music with Sweet Transvestite, and you go, okay, this looks interesting. Or, you know, Time Warp, or Over at the Frankenstein Play. So you think this is pretty darn interesting. And Richard, because again he had to give us some clues as to what the cues were going to be for going into each song. So the one I quote in the book, and the one is that because that's the one I remember vividly, was that he said, at this point, Eddie comes out of the Coke machine and Columbia screams, Eddie, and then I'll count you in. And I just thought, yeah, okay. It's not going to be the Sound of Music. You know, it's going to be a bit more interesting than that, hopefully. And then just to explain who the band members were, there was Richard played keyboards. I was on drums. We had a guy called Dave Channing, who was principally a saxophonist, but he answered an ad in, I think it was in the Melody Maker, one of the musical papers of the day, and it called for a saxophonist doubling bass guitar, which is quite unusual. And so Dave did that. And then we had this amazing character who I'd worked with previously, as a guy called Ian Blair, but he called himself Count Ian Blair. And I think it was self-conferred. I don't think he was in reality a count, but everybody called him Count, and he referred to himself in the third person in a way as the Count, you know. And he was very much like Keith Richards. He kind of looked like Keith. He could play guitar like Keith. And he was this amazingly confident, kind of effervescent social guy. A lot of the things that I wished I could be, but sadly had never been, really. And he was a character. So at the end of the second day's band rehearsal, Richard Hartley said, look, I'm off to rehearse with the cast now, because the cast had been elsewhere. rehearsing their vocals. And he said, would you guys like to come along, you know, because it would be useful for us to see and hear what they were doing, and useful for them because they'd just been working with just keyboard, Richard on keyboards. So Count and I said, yeah, great. Dave had a gig somewhere in London, a jazz gig. And so he had to pass, and Count and I went along, and we met the cast for the first time. And then going full circle back to one of your earlier questions, I knew at the end of that first meeting that it was going to be a success, that it was going to work. Now, you know, it's a kind of a magic in a way, I suppose, that happens. But yeah, you kind of knew.
It's interesting because, you know, growing up with it and going to the midnight shows and the incarnation of it that happened after you were the movie, and then with coming to the show and playing the characters and this whole cultural phenomenon that became. When I first saw it, and you allude to it to a certain extent, Tim Curry, to me, like, it was so unique and so amazing, and his face and his voice, it just seemed like that was to me what Rocky Horror was. And I think it was a lot of people. And you talk a little bit about talk about the story about, you know, how he might have been unsure about the sexuality of it, so he walked around in ladies' shoes to get started.
Yeah, that was his way of, this is at rehearsal, the first time that I saw, and he carried this on through the other rehearsals that we did too, as well. He had ladies' shoes on, women's shoes on, because that was his way of getting into that particular part. And I remember him saying, he played a soldier once, and the way that he got into that was by wearing big boots. And gave him that grounding, literally, I suppose, and got him into the character. But yeah, I mean, and then to go on a little bit, when if you can imagine, the first time we saw Tim in a full dress rehearsal, you know, he'd got all this gear on, and it was just one more element that just seemed to slot into place perfectly. I can't imagine anybody could have played that role better. It was absolutely made for him. And there was talk at the time of the film about Jagger playing it and Bowie playing it, and I just don't believe that. And both those guys they came to the show, and they saw Tim playing it, and I don't know, who knows what goes on in people's heads, but I think if I'd have been him, I'd have said, no, you know, no, let's back off this one. This guy's got it nailed. And Tim was one of those elements that, I don't know about coincidence or whether the stars were aligned or whatever. There was just so many things like that
Yeah,
the whole thing slotted into place, you know.
yeah, like the Beatles.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, even Richard writing it, Richard wrote the thing. He was in Jesus Christ Superstar. He was like in the chorus, okay, and he got promoted up to play Herod. And Richard decided, in typical Richard fashion, that he would play Herod in the style of Elvis, okay, which I think is fantastic. And so did he. He loved Elvis. But whoever, I don't know, it was the MD or somebody, it was only for one performance and he got fired. But why it's great in that way is that he went home and he thought, well, you know, what the hell am I going to do now? And he thought, well, I'll maybe have a look at that musical idea that I had. You know, I got a couple of songs that he was mucking about with. And he sat down effectively and wrote the Rocky Horror Show. And, you know, had he not been fired, then of course that would never have happened, you know. So there was another element there that slotted in. Jim Sharman, who, forgive me, Sam, if I'm just rambling on here a bit, you can stop me at any time you want. Jim Sharman, who was the director, had directed Richard in initially in Jesus Christ Superstar, Richard had been with Tim Curry in Hair. They'd done a touring version of Hair, and Richard gave the script to Tim. Said, you know, have a read of this and see what you think. So there are all these kind of little things that kind of slotted together, you know.
It's funny. I watched this interview with Tim Curry, and he was talking about. They're asking him if he was sick of doing it. This was after the movie, and he goes, "Well, during the play, it was just a couple of hours, and then I could get out of the character. But when I did the movie, it was just every day." And he eventually, which reminded me, you know, Tim Curry went on to have a wonderful career, and then had this debilitating stroke. And you know, you and I both should not take for granted, like we were talking about earlier, how lucky we are. It's like that, and you go, you know, But he was an amazing, magnetic personality, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the other. Oh, you know what? Talk about how you thought the guy who was the narrator and then became Dr. Scott should have stayed. Because I agree with you.
He was amazing. That was a guy called Jonathan Adams, as you said in the film. He plays Dr. Everett Scott, but as the narrator, he was absolutely brilliant. And again, I suppose because I knew who Edgar Lustgarten was, and that was the character that Richard had based him on, it had some extra kind of meaning. But I mean, he was just brilliant. You had to kind of see it, and that's the shame, you know, in a way that wasn't on celluloid. It wasn't, and so other people will never know. You know, the people who saw him in the first couple of venues that we played at would have seen that. And you have to kind of picture him in the time warp as well, because that was just, you know, it was hilarious. There was a newspaper critic who said it was like watching a dowager duchess do a striptease. You know, it was just wonderful. He was great.
I'm taking notes again because you make me think of so many different things. But on the side, I was thinking about the tap dance part when the drummer really gets to do something.
Yeah, I was just trying to help Nell out because I hope she'll forgive me. She wasn't the world's greatest tap dancer. So somebody said, it may have come from Jim Sharman, it may have come from Richard Hartley, I don't know, but somebody said, can you, when Nell goes into her tap dance, can you tap along with your sticks on the rim of the drum, because it'll, you know, make it sound 10 times better than like there's a dozen tap dancers there. So yeah, I tried it and it worked, and Nell didn't complain. Nobody said don't do it again. So you know, I kept it on, used to do it.
The other thing about the narrator, and since we mentioned the guy that replaced the guy from and was from Bonzo Dog Band, and you also mentioned Vivian Stanshall, and I always think of Rawlinson's End, and the way Vivian Stanshall could adopt that same type. You know, and then, dear reader, let's move on. And you know,
exactly. Yeah, he was an amazing character, wasn't he? He was just so charismatic. He was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, we had sorry, go on.
He had an untimely end, and that then reminded me the gentleman you hired from Bonzo Dog Band died of a heroin overdose when he was 28 years old.
Yeah, well, I think he may have been a bit older than that. But the thing with Dennis was a lovely guy. This is the bass player who was in the Bonzo Dog Band, and I'd done a few other things with Dennis, and I liked him a lot. And the bass slot became available at the theatre upstairs. We had an extension of 2 weeks. We were only supposed to be there for 3 weeks, but they could extend it by 2. They couldn't go any further than that because there was another production due to come in. And our original bass player, Dave, had some other stuff booked, and he very gallantly, because, you know, this thing was going somewhere, and he must have known that as well. But he said, look, I'm committed to doing some other stuff. So he went off. And I said to Richard Hartley, you know, I know this guy, this bass player called Dennis Cowan, who I think would be great. And Dennis came in and he did a fabulous job. And the thing with Dennis, it was, he used to take drugs. He never he was always sober and in a fit state to do any show that I ever played with him, and I played a lot. He stayed with the show for a long time, and he did drugs, but he always turned up and he was on time and he did a first class job. But he used to make me laugh because he was a vegetarian, and he used to tell me off because he'd be eating all these seeds and nuts, and he'd say, that meat that you're eating, it's killing you, man. And I said, like you're putting all this stuff inside your veins, and like you're worried about me eating a bit of a burger or something. It's kind of.
But at the end of
crazy.
that run, the end of the run at the little place, talk about where you moved on to, and then like earlier with Bowie and androgynous rock and all that again slotting into place. So the next, you moved down the road, Kings Road, I guess.
Yeah, we moved a bit further down to a place called the Classic Cinema. It was a cinema, and they were going to pull it down. It was going to be pulled down, and it ultimately it was. And it's now it's a big kind of drugstore on the Kings Road. Anyway, my thought on that is that Michael White, who was our producer, he needed somewhere quick because he had a big hit on his hands, and he knew that. So he needed to have a venue to put us in. And that thing was available, and they said, look, it's for 3 months. You can have it for 3 months, and then that's the deadline. So he snapped it up, and we moved down to the Classic Cinema, and we went from having 63 seats, which is all we could seat at the theatre upstairs. 63 seats was maximum. We went from that to, it wasn't huge. I think it was about 257, I think, something like that. So it was a kind of a step up. And I liked that venue. It didn't have the same. I loved the theatre upstairs. I absolutely loved that. I love the connection that you can have with an audience in a small, intimate venue. Now, maybe for the cast, it was a pain in the butt. I don't know, because they had to work, around us, the audience, and this is a tiny, tiny space for them to work in. So I think there was a sense of relief in a way when they moved out to the Classic. But I think in another way they probably quite missed it as well. It's something I like now when I'm lucky enough to play venues. I still like playing kind of intimate venues where you can really make a connection with the audience. Now, I have to say I don't often get the opportunity to play massive venues, so I don't want to give that impression. Most of the places I play are pretty small. You might get an audience of 150, 200 people, sometimes possibly less. But I struggle a little bit if I go and watch a band in a huge barn somewhere where you've got massive screens, and you have to. They're so far away. If you're at the back, you can't see anything. You have to watch the guys on the screen. And I know it's a different experience, I suppose. But for me, having that kind of connection with people, and when they come up to you afterwards and they say that was great, we really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. And that for me has a lot of meaning. And what else is music about if it's not about connecting with people and emotion? Those are the two most important things.
I thought about that because 2 weeks ago I saw the Stones here in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So it's the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010s, 2020s. And I just went kind of like as an anthropological experiment. You know how they have the main stage and then they come out and they do like their So I got the first row of that little octagon because I just wanted to see, is this really them? Is it some kind of and they were great. And Mick doing exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Same thing where he does that and just rests. Thinking, this is impossible. There's got to be something between the microphone and the speaker that's changing their voices. But I watched it, and he's 80. He's as old. He's young. He's younger than the president of the United States. Why is it that all these 80-year-old people are still hanging around so much anymore?
I don't know. It's strange, isn't it? I'm glad it was a great show. That's really good. A little bit about an aside. My My dad, when he moved from the factory, became a driving instructor, and he taught Ronnie Wood to drive, because Ronnie Wood comes from the same hometown as me. And Ronnie Wood still owes him for 2 driving lessons, because he wasn't in the Stones at the time. He was in a band called the Byrds, and they didn't have any money. So he kind of reneged on 2 payments to my dad. And I saw him somewhere, this is, I don't know how many years later. And he reminded me, it's a bit like the Queen of England. It would have been the Queen at the time. He said, "Oh, I haven't got any money." Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But he said, "I haven't got any money on me." So that's Ronnie Wood for you. The other thing, Mick came to see the show. He tried to see it at the Royal Court Theatre on the very last night, and I was coming in the foyer, and Mick was coming towards me, and Count, the guy I spoke about earlier on, he had his arm around Mick's shoulder like this, kind of cozying up to Mick, whispering in his ear. And it, if you screwed your eyes up a little bit, you could have thought it was Keith and Mick. And poor old Bianca, he was married to Bianca at the time, was struggling on behind him. She looked a bit kind of lost and slightly annoyed.
She always looked.
Well, okay. then that's good, I suppose. But
Amy Yoko.
Yeah. They'd come see the show, and it ultimately got cancelled to cut to the quick, because the guy who played Rocky, Rainer Burton, he was a good friend of mine. He had some glitter that had got down his little briefs. He used to wear these little briefs, and it had infected his penis, had gone around the head of his penis and cut, because the glitter was glass back then. It wasn't, it was literally glass. And he was just in agony. And we had to cancel. We didn't have any understudies at all. We couldn't afford understudies. But Mick did get to see the show. He came to the Classic, the next venue that we played, as did David Bowie, on separate nights. But those 2 guys came.
It's close to, I guess, what was Ziggy Stardust, 72, 73?
Yeah, would have been. Yeah.
It really, I mean, I wonder what it was culturally that, it's a shame, because now all these things have become political things. Back then, it was just like, and that's one of the documentaries about Rocky Horror. Basically, all the people who come and play the parts and all that, they say it's a safe place to be. No matter what you are, you can be whatever you are in that theater, and no one judges you. You're just whoever you are.
Yeah. I get lots of things from people from all over the world who say, we went to see Rocky Horror last week, and we all got dressed up as our favorite characters, and we went on the subway, the underground in London, or we went on the bus to get to the theater, and everybody else was looking, but they all knew who we were or what show we were going to see and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, at the time, it was, I don't know, it didn't feel strange. I don't know how to explain that. It felt okay.
Yeah. I don't know why either.
No.
It's just certain, it's like the times, it's like times making demand in politics. I mean, who the hell would think what's happening in America would have happened? It's impossible to
Yeah.
Still happens. But yeah, it's kind of like that. And it was really nice. But I mean, I remember when I first saw it, there was a friend of mine, Jerry Wexler. He was like he was like the Count. He could do anything.
Yeah.
Like, so like the first week of school, when you had to drop your courses or add your courses, there was a long line of people that would, like, all day. And I was at the end of the line. He goes, "Just come on." And he walk up to the front, and he just says, "Excuse me," and then he does whatever he does. And so he took a chimpanzee to Rocky Horror Picture Show, held his hand, and bought it, and they let him.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic. I think Tim got a refused entry somewhere, because he said, "Look, I'm Tim Curry," and they said, "Yeah, you're the 3rd person this week," or whatever, that said that, and they wouldn't let him in. They didn't believe him.
You talk about the characters. Run down the characters when you're upstairs in the little room.
Yeah,
it's really nice the way you talk about each of them and describe them. And
Mm.
And then talk about Rocky and his sexual predilections, and you thought that he was going to get together with who was it? The most
Pat Quinn. Yeah, he tried really hard. Yeah.
But yeah, things didn't work out. But yeah,
Yeah.
so how many of the characters from the original switched over to the movie, and what parts did they play? People.
Nell Campbell made it, who played Columbia, and Nell was kind of bolted on for that part as well. She was really, really good. Jonathan Adams, who switched roles and became the instead of being the criminologist in the film, he became Dr. Scott. Richard O'Brien, obviously, it was his piece, and rightly, and he was great in that role as well. Pat Quinn, who was the object of Raina Burton's desires, Pat Quinn made it in again. Well earned, because she was great. She played a dual role at the theatre. She played the usherette, singing science fiction double feature, and she was great in that role as well. She was very cutesy, you know, like I don't know, all the guys and half of the women in the audience would have wrapped her up and taken her home for sure. She was brilliant in that. But then she played a completely different character. Pat made it into the film. Tim very obviously did as well. But I think the deal for the movie was partial that Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick, who played Brad and Janet in the movie, the film company said, you know, we want you to use these two guys. They're under contract to us, and we want you to use them, as you know, kind of like record companies and film companies, I guess, sometimes do. So they did. I think the whole UK Theatre Upstairs cast potentially could have been in the thing, you know, and would have been just as good. The one maybe unfortunate guy was Paddy O'Hagan, because Meatloaf took his role, and Meatloaf would be pretty hard to replace. But then if he hadn't been doing the movie, then I guess it wouldn't have mattered. And Paddy was great. I loved him. He was a smashing guy, and his wife was very kind to me as well. It was a really nice company feeling. It was a good, and again, going back to one of the earlier things we spoke about, where you knew it was going to be successful. Everybody kind of knew that, but nobody. It wasn't trying to break a spell, but nobody went around kind of saying, you know, this is going to be massive. But we all kind of knew somehow that it was just right place, right time, I think. Yeah.
Meatloaf said that when he went to the first rehearsal,
yeah,
he got up and left.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
But it's like, that's another cool thing about the book is that I've listened to Time Warp like 20 times since I read your book, and I hadn't listened like, I don't know, 20 years, and it's great. I mean, it's and the drumming is great, and there's one part of it where basically it's just the drum that carries the whole song. I guess maybe you remember there's like an 8-beat, and then there's a stop.
Yeah.
And it's really good, because what I was playing to you before was just the backing. It wasn't.
Yeah.
So
okay.
You could really hear the drummer.
Yeah,
so
there was a couple of.
Yeah, Time Warp. What was it like drumming through Time Warp? There's more of a technical question, that because you weren't drumming in Time Warp is not a quiet drummer.
Well, it had to be, because you know those people were so close to the band, and even closer to the guys on stage. You couldn't.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the movie in the movie you could.
Yeah, in the movie you can whack it out, and it doesn't really matter. A lot of the time, I threw a sheet over the whole drums, so that kind of really cut the noise down. And I used to do that when I was a kid, when I was learning to play as a kid, and I started playing when I was about 8. And I put pegs on the cymbals as well. My mum's clothes pegs I put on each cymbal, so that when you hit them, they didn't really make a noise. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood peaceful. So yeah, but at the same time, because of the nature of the show, it's a rock show, you know, and you need to be able to give the right amount of energy, even, which is difficult at low volumes.
Yeah,
but you still need to, you know, you need to retain that energy to make the thing work. So somehow I think we managed to do that. And the other great song, I mean, they're all pretty good songs. Sweet Transvestite is a great song, and Tim's a great singer. So, you know, that was a complete winner, absolute winner. And just to explain where the band were in relation to the audience, we were sat, hence the title of the book, behind the curtain. We were sat behind a curtain which doubled as a
scrim.
Yeah, scrim, exactly. There you go. You're a theatre man of the theatre. So nobody knew we were there. That was until we struck up. That was we had to sit very quietly when the audience came in. And we could see from where we were sat, we could see the whole audience, and we could see all the action as well. So it was fascinating, because you get Tim on his first entrance, he stands at the top of the ramp, you know, and he comes down, and then he starts belting out sweet, I'm just a sweet transvestite, you know, throws the cloak off, and you could see the audience reaction, which was priceless. You know, they kind of go, "Ooh, you know, this is interesting. This is great." So that was a fun thing as well. And I don't think that where the band is situated, I don't think has ever been replicated at any other venue, as far as I'm aware. Anyway, it just, we had to be there because that was how it worked. You know, it worked in that room.
How long did you work with the show?
About 2 years in total. And the first 18 months of that 2 years were pretty darn good. Then it slowly settled into something else. It morphed, in my opinion, into something else where, you know, we were kind of on the tourist route, and you'd get buses pull up outside the theatre, and they seemed to be Japanese people mostly. I think nothing against those people at all, but it just so happened that they were often Japanese, and they'd go in, and you know, the Japanese know about theatre, they understand theatre, and then the politest race in the world, I think. So they would sit very quietly, and they'd watch what was going on, and they'd applaud at the end, but there was no reaction at all during the show. So, you know, the things that had really excited me, when the narrator said a line or made me laugh out loud the first few times I heard it, all that kind of stuff was lost. That was gone.
That's interesting. Is that why you left?
No, not entirely. I should have left about that time, because it became more of a job than anything else, and it was silly. And I was making quite a lot of money. I was doing the show, and then during the day I was able to do some session work and stuff like that. So it's one of the few times that I've stuck something purely for the money, I think, in my life. No, I left because we're basically, I had an equivalent, I suppose, of a nervous breakdown. I don't know what the technical term would be today, but it would probably, you know, mental health back then was like today. It's quite a subject, and people discuss it openly, and there are a lot of avenues that you can go for treatment. Back then, that wasn't available really. So I kind of skulked away and hid behind the curtains again. I was behind the curtains of my flat this time for a couple of years or so.
That's your secret.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know whether I'll write anything else. I wouldn't write a sequel, and I said I'd never write a novel, but I'm kind of semi-interested.
Well, I've gotten doing it because I've told you how good it was. I shouldn't have kept the compliment. No, you really do have I mean, like I said, I mean, I can think of a dozen anecdotes from the book now. Oh, okay, since we've gone on like for an hour now, let's close out by like you talk a bit about the jigs, about groups you've been in now, and you talk about band breakups and things like that. So we're now, and I actually think, yeah, you could write another book, but and a novel about a rock band. But so where are you now, and what are you doing?
Well, geographically, I'm on the Welsh borders, which is such a fantastic place to live. It's beautiful, and Wales is a magical, kind of mystical, beautiful land. Robert Plant lives not far away, and he kind of says the same sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I love Robert. I think he's fantastic.
Sure.
But I won't go into that. There's another story surrounding Robert. But so yeah, at the moment, there's a couple of things going on. I very foolishly, from a man of my age, went running, and it was very muddy, and I fell over and I smashed my shoulder. So that's put me out of action now for about 3 months, and it's slowly getting there. I'm having some physio for that. So I've had to cancel some stuff there. And prior to that, just around about the time that the book came out, I had some chemotherapy, which I think has probably, the cancer's probably gone, but I'm still having a few tests to kind of sort that. But I'm now, because I'm not able to go out very much, and well, in terms of working, I'm finishing off mixing down an album for the Jigs. We're very nearly there with that. And I'm writing and recording a solo album of my own, which is not as scary as it sounds. It's actually, I think, I'm a reasonable judge, and allowing for bias and everything else. I think it's going to be okay. So those are the things I'm working on.
Yeah, try and get it out there on YouTube and see if we're glad to help out with that too, or at least
Thank
getting
you.
It's funny, it sucks getting old. I mean, the only thing about it that, I mean, I've never been able to know my limitations, which is why I feel like crap now, because of all the crap I did, both of us. And so, like, but I finally, like, I play racquetball with this guy every week.
Yeah.
And so I know I can get to the ball. I know it. But then in my mind, I go, don't run. Do not run for it. Just play an old man's game. The ball will come back to the middle and you can get it then. So I have to say it out loud. I have to say, don't run. Save both. My knee still sucks, but you know, it would have been a lot worse. But isn't it hard to do that though? To say, like, I mean,
it's a bit like the Stones, isn't it? I'm not going to compare myself to the Stones in some ways, but those guys are still out there doing it, and they're doing it. I guess they don't need financially to do it anymore, so there always has to be a reason for doing something. I can only guess that it's that they're having fun. They want to do it,
and they've never done anything else. I mean,
no.
Yeah, and I think they would like to Mick would probably like to die on stage, and laudable to a certain extent. But he also says that he has to do like 20 things in the morning to get ready for his concert, and he hates every single one of them.
Yeah. But we all have stuff like that, don't we? Keith's never going to die, of course, so it doesn't really matter, you know.
He's pickled. Oh, I could go on forever. I could spend hours talking to you about the Bonzo Dog Band. I was jealous of you knowing so. I mean, We Are Normal and Trouser Press and Roger here and all those guys.
I bumped into a couple of them occasionally, and Roger Innes I met a couple of times at festivals. I did see Viv towards the end of his life. I went to a show of his, but man, he was so far out of it then.
He had Boat, and he was doing a play. Yeah, wasn't he a genius? I mean, he's an incredible guy. All right,
what I thought about him as well was that he gave this very upper English, you know, accent, but I mean, he wasn't born into that kind of situation.
Father made him do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was great. But you know, my mother used to read the obituaries until everyone she knew died, and then she stopped reading them. We'll be there someday.
Yeah. Hang in there, Sam. Hang in there. Good man.
You too. That's a good way to end.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you soon, hopefully.
Take care. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.